You're listening to the Ask Ava podcast, where we give real answers to real questions from teens and young adults about relationships, consent, dating violence, and more. I'm Jessica Scoltetti. I'm an outreach and community engagement manager at Safe+Sound Somerset. We are an organization in Somerset County, New Jersey that provides free services for people who have witnessed or experienced violence. And we work with children, teens, and adults. So today we are joined by Safe and Sound volunteer Ella Blank, who goes to the University of Maryland. Hi, Ella.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So we have a really interesting topic today. This is a question we've got from a group, and the question is, Dear Ava, why do people joke about domestic and sexual violence? So I'm going to throw it to you.
When looking at this question, I think that there could be a lot of reasons why people joke about these things. But one of the first things that I thought about when reading this was that, sexual and domestic violence are both very serious topics to talk about. And I think that when people see these serious topics, they feel uncomfortable. And a lot of people use joking to downplay these serious topics and make them feel more comfortable and downplay the severity of them. These topics are uncomfortable to talk about, and especially for different people, it can be harder to talk about these things, and they make jokes about it to make them feel more comfortable, around these kind of stigmas around these topics that aren't talked about as much.
I have found too that some people joke so they don't have to talk about it anymore, right? Like they'll say it and then they don't want to talk about it anymore. So that's why they joke about it. This is something that we hear all the time in the community, and that's why I was hoping we could do an episode about it. I've had situations with high schoolers in class who start laughing, and I'll have to say something just because there are people who are really experiencing this, right? And sometimes it comes down to me having to say that. I've had people walk up to my tabling events, like adults who, this is a direct quote, someone will say, "Oh, he's beating me up," right? Or, one of the other ones that comes to mind that is everywhere. I don't know if you've seen this, Ella, but the joke about men in prison being sexually assaulted is everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Super common, definitely.
Yeah, it's actually when you start to notice it, you really start to see it, and it's disturbing. Like, for me as a violence preventionist, someone who does this professionally, like seeing it everywhere is like, you can't unsee it. Another one that I wanted to just mention too that we hear a lot is just the casual language that everybody uses, a lot of people use to talk. So like, "That killed me," or "I'm dead," or, "That book put me in a chokehold." Like, these are things that it's interesting, like how have these things like gotten into our casual language, and like we just joke about them today.
Yeah, you never really think about those kind of things because they're so normalized. But when you really step back, our language is super violent, and there are things that are said and it just goes over people's heads because they're so common. And I think when it comes to jokes, people, the more funny it is, the less serious it is, or the less uncomfortable it is for people to talk about. And I know that you said you've seen this in high schools and with adults too. But I've also seen it in college. I think there's no direct age range where people tend to make jokes more. Honestly, it's really eye-opening to see that everyone does it. I'm in college and we have presentations, and people will make jokes after the presentations because it's such a heavy topic to talk about and people don't like feeling that, heavy, uncomfortable feeling. So they'll make jokes about it to make it lighthearted. But that can really hurt survivors, people, it can lessen or make them feel like people are belittling what they have gone through.
Totally. People don't always realize how many others have gone through this. And when we're talking about domestic and sexual violence, I mean, there's huge numbers all over the world. I mean, it's just, it's everywhere. And they may not even realize, kind of, I think what you're kind of saying is like the person next to them may be dealing with this, right? And the effects of this, and how hard, how much harder it makes, you know, survivors able to tell their truth, should they choose to find support, to find healing, to have people believe them, which we know is a huge problem. And I think jokes just generally make it really even more difficult for those things to happen.
Yeah, for sure. I think when looking at this question, rape culture also just
Mm,
contribute, well, it is rape culture to normalize these kind of things. Um, like we were talking about before, you know, sometimes there is a survivor sitting next to you. Maybe sometimes they're the ones who are making the jokes to make themselves feel more comfortable, but that's a whole other
mm,
topic to think about. And that's a whole other discussion to be had because that has to deal with them. But when it comes to rape culture and that kind of thing, and just making jokes to make it like more lighthearted for people who are uncomfortable talking about it, I think sometimes they don't realize how it can hurt other people.
absolutely. Yeah, that topic you mentioned about survivors downplaying and making jokes, I definitely think that would be definitely a good episode to do in the future, because that is a different kind of topic. But yeah, I think when you talk about rape culture, like the things at the top of this pyramid, which I know we don't have in front of us because this is a podcast, but at the top there's sexual violence and death, which sometimes happens. And those things don't just happen in a vacuum, which means they don't just happen on their own. There's all these other things underneath that make the culture acceptable for those things to happen, right? Like strict gender roles, harassment, jokes. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones off the top of my head. At the very bottom, we just have the general phobias, you know, homophobia, racism, sexism. All of these structures that exist in our society play into people thinking it's okay to sexually assault somebody, and then sometimes also hurt them in other ways. Like some people are murdered, right? Some people are killed. And those things don't just happen out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think when these jokes are made, it's important to recognize that it's not funny. And I think intervening is one of the things that's important. Um, Especially when people make jokes, it's because maybe they don't understand the severity of it. So maybe saying like, "Hey,
Mm,
that wasn't funny," or, you know, stepping back and making people realize that it's not something that they should be joking about is a super important step in, you know, creating a space that has less stigma in it, you know, being the person who says that wasn't funny, because the more that you bring it back to reality and understand the severity of some of these topics, you know, educating people on what they're talking about and what they're joking about and how serious it is for people who go through it.
hmm Some people will say you're overreacting. Some people will say it's not really a big deal. You know, this is what everyone says. And is it though? Like, no, that's not true. But like, I think especially if it's someone close to you, like you're saying, Ella, if it's a friend or family member, like go ahead and let them know that you don't appreciate what they said. You know, I believe survivors, and I think that's really harmful to survivors. So can you phrase that differently? Right? Or can we, you
Yeah.
know, like it can be simple as just like you kind of said, like that wasn't funny. Um, and you'd be surprised how much your friends and family members, if they really care about you, will take that into consideration.
Yeah, for sure. And it can be hard, especially when it's a friend or a family member or someone that you're close to. It can be hard to be the person that says, "Hey, that wasn't funny." Um,
Yeah.
but like you said, I think that if you were to say something or step in and be, you know, honest about how you feel about those topics, I think that if they respect you, then they would respect that you said that. Um, Hopefully, and
Mhm.
realize that it really wasn't funny. It's a serious topic.
Yeah, and you never know who else is listening. If you're the person who's able and safe enough to stand up and say, "Listen, I believe survivors," or "That wasn't funny," there could be somebody else in the room who now knows that you're a safe person. And that could mean everything to them. They may never tell you, you may never know what they've gone through, but you're showing that you believe survivors and you're making the world a safer place by sticking up for them.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah. So on that note, if you're struggling, if you have experienced violence, you're looking for support, you can call or text the Safe and Sound Somerset helpline. It's 24/7. All of our advocates are trained to work with all ages. And the number is 866-685-1122. And we just want people to know that the helpline is there, even if you're not experiencing a crisis. We're there to talk and support you. Some people are afraid to call or text because they don't think that their question or their problem is serious enough, but we want you to know that you matter, and come and talk it out with us should you want someone to listen. So is there anything else you wanted to add, Ella?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about.
We covered a lot, and I would just challenge people. I would challenge people to start looking for the things that people say in our culture that are harmful and violent. And maybe there are other ways we can change how we say things. It's a good challenge, right? Is to call those things out and notice them.
They're more common than you think.
Yes, everywhere. So on that note, we're going to sign off for today. But again, thank you so much for this conversation, Ella.
Of course. Thank you for having me.